Another Day by Kris Owens. Part 1, Winter, Chapter 1. There was that smell again. This town smelled of rotten eggs most days, with the occasional smell of burning plastic thrown in just to shake things up. This collection of businesses, factories, and houses. This town was littered with walnut trees, dogwoods, oaks, and an endless amount of birch. But you couldn't smell a single one of them for the ever-present smell of hell creeping around the corner. Margaret hated it here, hated this town and its people, and lately she had begun to hate her husband. She disliked being told what to do, hated being controlled, hated having her choices taken from her. This last year had seen her husband begin doing that, turning into a controlling, demanding male who was trying to take away what illusion of free choice she had built up around herself. Her husband had demanded she find a job. He had demanded she stopped being a housewife solely watching their 2 kids, and he had taken the choice away from her. She hated him for that. Sure, she hadn't taken it without a fight. There had been many fights all the way up until today, minutes before she had left her house. She was still feeling the anger and tension from exchanging harsh words with that man who had decided he knew best for the entire family. That man who had decided that their relationship would now be a dictatorship with him as supreme ruler. This wasn't what she had agreed to when she had married him, but she did not want to leave him. If I left him, I would still have to leave my children with a stranger while I worked to support them. In the end, she realized that either way, she was going to lose this fight. So now, here she was, riding in the back of a taxi cab to the very first day of Red Cross Certified Nurses Assistant Training classes. Was she nervous? Yes, very. She hadn't been in school for 7 years now, and when she had been in school, she hadn't exactly been on the honor roll. What little she had retained had long since been pushed to the back of her mind in the 7 years after she had left school. And yet, here she was, about to start the first day of school all over again. This is damn ridiculous. The amount we've spent on this we could have used on groceries or the rent. He thinks this is going to work, and he thinks I'm just going to hand over my money to him. Again, she felt the tension of anger sweeping across her brow. Looking out the window, Margaret watched as the taxi passed through a heavily run-down stretch of what should have been considered historic houses and entered the official, and well-maintained at that, historic district. Her destination lay within the outer stretches of the historic district of the stink-filled town, close enough to the 4 roads that made up the district to still smell the scent of baking cookies, but still far enough away to catch a whiff of Mr. Boston now and again. She longed for her hometown back in the northern state that she had long since filled with biased memories of sunshine and pleasantries and clean air and etc. A northern town that, in reality, looked almost exactly like this town, but in her mind you could easily tell the difference. But in that northern town of trees and factories and low-income housing and that same rotten egg smell, things still seemed to shine a little more brightly. Things seemed to be a little more classy, and she would have loved to go running back to that town under the self-deceptive memory, except that she really didn't know any of her relatives. She had never known her father and maintained a love-hate relationship with her mother. She really just didn't want to be here in this state or in this town. She was tired of smelling Satan's asshole every day. So they started more of them classes again? A burst of old alcohol and still cigarettes hit Margaret in the face when the cab driver rolled his head towards her to speak. Yeah, bitterness. Something like that. Glad to see they taking care of that old schoolhouse. I remember going to it in the 60s. Each word was more stained than the last with the smell of dead ends. Well, I've never been there. I'm sure it was a blast back in the 70s. 60s? Whatever. But I really don't want to be here to begin with, so you're wasting your time telling me about it. Margaret crossed her arms and stared ahead, hoping the old guy would just shut up. Humph! The driver turned his attention back to the road. The rest of the ride, all 3 minutes of it, was taken in silence. That'll be $7, ma'am. Another cloud of alcohol came floating to her from the front as the driver brought the car to a stop. Margaret reached into the small brown purse that hung across her chest. It had been long since overburdened with counterculture symbols and icons of her teen angst. Along with the angst, the purse also sported a couple of pentagrams and inks to support her on-again, off-again following of Wicca. She had never been one for hiding in the broom closet, much to the ire of her coven's high priestess. When she was getting along with the coven leader, she was a Wiccan. When she and the coven leader determined that the two parties needed to refocus their energies in a positive way before adding to the group, Margaret regarded herself as spiritual, not religious. The coven of Diana's dance could wait forever for all Margaret cared. I don't need a coven. I don't need someone telling me how to do my magic. There is more respect in being an eclectic witch. Fishing through the purse, Margaret found a 5 and a pair of crumpled ones. Unceremoniously, she shoved the wadded bundle of paper toward the driver. He grunted a reply, and she exited out of the back of the cab. It was a surprisingly warm day for it being the middle of January, but it had been a rather weak winter this year. Most of the trees still held a considerable amount of green leaves, leading to a haphazard display of holdout leaves on gray, dry branches, trying in vain to shield the sky from her. The whole display just gave the impression of a lack of maintenance. Margaret shifted the weight of her purse to her left side as she stepped away from the taxi. She had watched the cab move away from the sidewalk and begin back in the direction from whence they came. Her reflection stared back at her as the vehicle rolled onward to its new destination, giving her a last-minute glimpse of her freedom racing away from her and a last-minute critique of her appearance. Margaret was youthful in appearance, not looking a day over 17 because of the baby fat that lingered on her, even though she was actually 24 and 2 kids older. She had bright green eyes that should have revealed her to be a true redhead, but her natural hair color had been closer to dirty blonde, except that it was currently dyed pitch black. Her shoulder-length hair shifted slightly as a quick breeze moved past her. It was cold, but not as cold as she was used to. Winter this year had been dead on arrival. As the taxi disappeared after making a right down a nearby street, Maggie realized she was now fully on the path her husband had pushed her toward for the last 6 months. In the end, he had won the fight. He had exerted his control over her, and she had capitulated. She feared she had failed her fellow sisters, but there was that glimmer of hope that she would be able to redeem herself later. She would not stand for being a man's lapdog, even if she was married to said man. Maggie had been officially married for 2 years now to the man who had fathered her 2 children years earlier. In the past, they had not felt the need to make their union official, and in fact, their beliefs did not necessitate it either. Instead, Maggie and her husband always left the option of going their own way, should they realize they could no longer work together. The marriage came only after a friend explained to them the benefits, financially, of an official union. This had led to a hand-binding ceremony performed, as per their faith, and a separate justice of the peace ceremony, as per the law. But it was a union of convenience that held no real meaning to either of them, other than the benefits they could wring out of the government. They still maintained an open relationship, having gone from an open-minded couple to swingers with a single I do, bringing in other partners on occasion to satisfy their various lusts or fetishes, or, as Maggie found out later, it primarily involved her husband fulfilling his lusts for strange without the guilt and her just being a side dish. For a little more than a year, Maggie had slowly been testing her limits, pushing the bounds of what he'd allow, if nothing else than to wear him down for his perceived indiscretions. If she couldn't have what she wanted, then she would find a way to ruin it for the both of them. She wanted to push him until he either let her take a male lover, or he decided they should quit being so open sexually. The masterstroke of this plot involved something that had happened 6 months earlier, and had, in fact, set her going to these classes in motion. Margaret had taken a liking to a fellow witch, and ended up sleeping with her. but had intentionally failed to tell her husband that she was sleeping with someone from the coven. Nor did she have any intention of sharing the fellow witch with him. She wanted to see his reaction, wanted to make him angry, wanted to push him into ending their open relationship as best as she could. It was a petty thing to do and she knew it, but at the time she felt as if he, too, was trying his best to piss her off in every way possible. The plan had worked, at first, as the situation had made him not only angry, but had caused him to start claiming she had cheated on him by not letting him at least watch, but more so because she hadn't even told him about the other woman. It had taken a month for him to calm down enough to have a rational conversation with her, but even after a month, he was still angry over the act. This led to her husband demanding she stop just staying home with her 2 kids. She would now have to get a job to help support their family. He accused her of behaving like a child, of trying to make him jealous because of some childish thought that had popped into that shallow head of yours and caused the unjustified dissent she was now feeling toward him. This was the solution that came from his anger at what she had done. She was now training to become a nurse's assistant so she could then find a job at either a nursing home or a hospice, and then she would pay half the bills. She hadn't been happy about either part of that demand. Who was he to dictate she stop watching her children full time? Who was he to demand she let some stranger watch her children while she played doctor? And who was he to demand that she give him a percentage of her money?
We'll see about that one. He may have won one fight, but he will not be successful twice, especially on this one. Handing over my money on demand to him? Ha! We'll see.
Maggie turned in a semicircle away from the road and was greeted by an old brick building that looked just like the cab driver had implied it would. The building had been saved fairly recently. At least, it appeared to be fairly recent, from becoming another victim of the decay that threatened to swallow of what pockets of wealth still remained in this town. There were a set of 5 stone steps pressed within an embankment that neither touched the sidewalk she now stood on, nor touched the actual top of the rise. The embankment itself resembled nothing more than a giant pile of dirt peppered with the scant offerings of dead grass. Large, withered trees lined the upper portion of the embankment that, in the summertime, probably afforded a cool place to stand from the heat of the sun, but now only mocked the idea with the few leaves that still clutched to the branches. The bricks of the building were a faded red that showed the building had weathered numerous decades of abuse and neglect. The windows of the place were trimmed with white paint that looked fairly new compared to what the structure itself appeared to be, almost to the point of standing out in a tacky fashion. Clearly, the windows had been shattered and then boarded up sometime during its abandonment. The wooden double doors on the front that led into the place also appeared to be brand new, only helping to reinforce the idea that this building had been saved from abandonment. It made sense, Maggie reasoned, that this building looked as it did. The classes were being provided by the Red Cross, so she figured the cheapest place they could find would have been chosen in an effort to save money. In the back of her mind, she figured that the classes would probably reflect the choice of location.
He's wasting his money and my time. We need the money we're spending on these classes for other things. He refuses to listen to anything I say to him.
Maggie began the ascent up the stone steps, and her rubber shoes, not yet broken in, offered stiff resistance to the uneven surface she was attempting to tread. She noticed that no one else was outside waiting, and as far as she knew, the class had not been canceled. There was a minimum class size requirement before the date would even be announced, and as far as she knew, the minimum had been met.
The other students are probably inside already. Surely I can't be that early. If anything, I thought it was going to be late.